Okay, Angela, it's spring, and you know what that means? Tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
That's king of the garden, I think, in the South.
It is America's favorite vegetable to grow.
Is it really?
Nationwide, this is the one that everybody likes to grow the most. Even people that don't grow anything else will grow tomatoes.
And even if they don't eat them, they'll grow tomatoes.
That's almost true.
Okay, so today I thought we would touch on the most frequently asked questions that we get when people come to buy a tomato.
Okay.
Whether they're a seasoned gardener or new to the area, there are just certain questions we get asked every single time. So one of the first ones we get is, what is the difference between determinate and indeterminate?
Right. The difference between them is determinate it lies in the name.
Right.
It's going to grow to a determined height.
Right.
It kind of varies by tomato type, but you can usually count on 36 to 3 or 4 feet, 36 to 40 inches or so. And then it's going to set all of its fruit in a shorter period of time, generally in about a 2-week frame of time. So determinates are favored by people who are intending to can tomatoes and want to get their crop in a shorter period of time, or just people that like the idea of not having to manage a taller vine.
Okay, so they might lend themselves a little more to container gardening?
Definitely for containers.
Okay.
And then indeterminates, again, I'm not going to be determined how tall I grow. They are a true vining tomato.
Okay.
And so they will either crawl across the ground, or they will, best for the health of the plant, they will climb, and you've got to support them.
Right.
Tomato cages are not sufficient for these.
Okay.
So they either need to be staked, or you can string train them, which basically means that you're going to suspend. Usually we put conduit between 2 fence posts, two T-posts, and tie a string to that. And then it's very simple, because all you need to do is just gently wrap the vine around the string as it grows.
Perfect.
And if it exceeds that 5 or 6 feet tall, you can actually allow it to come back over and trail down, keeping it up in the air and with lots of good air circulation. But with an indeterminate, they're going to produce their clusters of fruit from the bottom up. So you're going to start with a cluster, and then that will ripen, and you'll have other clusters starting at that time, and they'll ripen in succession.
Right.
So you have a constant flow of tomatoes instead of that quick, short window of growth that you do with the determinates.
Can I prune my tomato?
You know, honestly, with the determinates, unless they're getting unruly and out of hand, it's best not to prune them.
Okay.
Because they do set off a lot of side branches that are going to be productive. You can always do selective pruning when they get out of bounds, and when they're really happy, they can do that.
Okay.
With an indeterminate, you should prune them.
All right.
You shouldn't allow the suckers to form and continue to grow. And of course, we're not going to have one on this tomato. These have already been very well taken care of. Well, here's one. So a sucker is this little growth that grows in this axil right here. And if we let this grow, it's going to form another tall vine.
Sure.
With the indeterminates, we need to pinch those out, and do it when they're young and small, so that you can just pinch with your fingertips. You don't require scissors or a pruner of any kind, and keep them where they have a single trunk.
Okay.
And they'll usually have leaf, flower cluster, leaf, flower cluster. And then as you harvest the tomatoes from an indeterminate, remove the bottom leaves.
Okay.
You really only need a specific number of leaves to provide the photosynthesis for the tomato. And the bottom leaves have a tendency to catch soil when we splash, either through rain or through irrigation. And that can end up with diseases at the bottom that travel up the plant. So just keep the base of it clean.
So it helps prevent spread of disease.
Yes.
And then keeps good airflow
Keeps very good airflow through the plant, which is what you're looking for.
So what is seed to harvest? So what is this? When we read on the tags, it gives you a day.
Right.
Like 75 day, 80 day, 60 day tomato. Why is that important?
Well, it's important based on when you're planting them, basically.
Okay.
And it's important for spring planting, but it gets even more important for fall planting.
Okay.
Which we do here on the Gulf Coast. So what that means is it's going to be the time that you can expect to harvest tomatoes from the time of your initial seed planting.
Okay.
So you have shorter day tomatoes and longer day tomatoes.
Right.
We know that in the spring here, the key to successful tomatoes is to get them in the ground as early as you can.
Right.
Take really good care of them.
Right.
Enjoy your harvest from them, and then during the summer, they're going to stop blooming. When we get to the point that our nights are too warm, they're gonna bloom, but they won't set the fruit.
Right.
So in that case, with the determinants, usually at that point we remove them from the garden. Your indeterminates, you can keep them going through the summer, and you might have a few tomatoes along the way with very favorable conditions. But generally, if you'll just keep them happy and healthy, they will start blooming and producing again in the fall.
Okay.
So that's another reason that people may choose to plant both determinants and indeterminates in their landscape.
So what is an average temperature that you're going to see less production?
You're going to see production start dropping when our nights are getting over that 75, 80 degrees. So it's really not based on your daytime temperature.
Right.
It can get really good and hot and it not bother the tomatoes. It's that nighttime temperature.
Perfect.
And what happens is the pollen gets sticky and
Right.
it doesn't shed properly. And so we'll see blooms, but then we don't see fruit as a result.
So I think your suggestion is brilliant. You want determinate and
Yes, you want
indeterminate.
both.
You'll go a little longer into the season with your indeterminates.
Right.
Your determinates, as you said, if you want to make sauces, juices, you want to get those in where you get a big yield at one
Right,
time.
all at one time. And then, like I say, we're blessed with the fact that we can go back in the fall
Right.
with our determinants. And there we want to look at the shorter day varieties so
Right.
that we can get the harvest before our first frost.
Because really, literally, tomato growing here is kind of a roll of the dice.
It really is a roll of the dice. It's very weather dependent.
Right.
It's, another thing people sometimes confuse about tomatoes is it's really not dependent on bees.
Right.
It's not that kind of pollination. They're basically self-fertile
Right.
as long as the weather conditions are good for them.
So if I were to take this transplant here home, how deep do I plant this?
Okay, we want to keep basically the top 4 leaves or so. So in
Right.
this case, I would want to actually plant it this deep, but I don't want the tomato leaves touching the ground.
Okay.
So I'm going to remove these. These are actually the seed leaves, or
Right.
cotyledon leaves. These will sometimes start to yellow and people get worried something's wrong with their
Right.
tomato, but they're really just out of energy.
Right.
So I would remove all of these lower leaves, and then I would dig a hole as deeply as I could, and then I would plant the tomato as
Literally this deep.
this high, as long as this isn't touching. And actually, if this one was touching, I could snip. This is a multi-leaf leaflet, so I would snip it here, and it would be just fine.
Okay.
And then if you can't dig deeply, if you haven't, if you've spent years working on your soil, we can get away with that.
Sure.
If you haven't, if it's a newly prepared bed and you're dealing with clay gumbo underneath that, then you can actually trench plant them, which means that we're going to dig a trench, we're going to plant them on their side,
Right.
we're going to give them a little mound of dirt to support them, and
Yes.
don't worry, you don't have to bend them up. If you do, they'll likely break.
Right.
Within a day or two, you'll
They
see that
stand-
tomato
yes.
taking off.
It's amazing to watch.
It is. It's kind of fun to watch. It happens very quickly.
Now, so I've gotten our soil prepped. We've got them planted. Do you have to feed them?
You really do need to feed these.
Okay.
Like any of our vegetables that we grow as an annual, they're going to need fertilization on a regular basis.
Sure.
I would say every 4 weeks for fertilizer in the ground, and I foliar feed my tomatoes every 2 weeks
Right.
in the landscape. They really respond very well to foliar feeding. They're more resistant to disease issues that way. They're more resistant to pest issues that way, and just generally more vigorous.
So our brigade food complete,
Yes.
a good organic time release,
Right.
good in calcium.
That's very important because tomatoes are the calcium lovers.
Right.
So this you can actually mix in the hole
Right.
before you plant. And then once you plant your tomato, you can start fertilizing above ground after that. And, between rain and irrigation, that's going to take
Right.
care of it there.
And then
like I
foliar
say, about
feed?
once a month, and then foliar feed every 2 weeks.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
going to help them a lot. And you can foliar feed with either a special foliar feed blend or liquid seaweed is going to do just as well in most cases.
Now, when we do them in the containers, and I see you've picked out 2 containers here, and I'm assuming because you need to give a tomato plenty of root room.
They do need plenty of room, and especially your indeterminates are going to be in the ground longer
Right.
and form a deeper root system.
So being in a container, do we need to feed them more often?
I let the tomato tell me. If I see
Okay.
any signs of yellowing, that's a sign to me that I may need to fertilize a little more often. And the main reason for that is, one, that roots cannot seek the natural nutrients in the
Sure.
soil. And number two, we have a tendency to wash them out, flush them out when we're doing our
Okay.
irrigation.
Okay.
So we may need to feed containers a little more often. And that really holds true with all of our
anything.
container plants.
Absolutely. So as far as pests are concerned on tomatoes,
Right.
two in particular come to mind. One is the lovely tomato hornworm,
Yes.
which is a great master of disguise.
Yes.
Oftentimes we find him not because we see him, but the droppings
Right,
that
we
he
see
leaves.
the frass, the
Exactly.
little black droppings that they leave,
Right.
and of course the damage that they do.
Which is monumental.
Yes, it is, very quickly.
So one good control for them that's an organic, very safe to use would be your BT.
Your BT. And of course this one needs to be ingested, so you're not
Right.
going to see an immediately drop off, but you will see, and you can use the BT the minute you see any signs of damage, even if you can't locate the hornworm.
Right.
Now I do have another strategy for managing hornworms.
Oh yeah, what is that?
More tomatoes.
Ah,
If you will grow a determinate, a big bushy determinate that you really don't care about production from, someplace else away from your vegetable garden.
Okay.
Put it in a cage and feed it and just let it go. Every time you find a hornworm, you can pick it up and move it. Now you might want to know, why do I want to do that? Why don't I want to destroy them all? Because they're a sphinx moth.
Right.
They're one of the little hummingbird moths.
Right.
And they're a pleasure to see around the landscape, and they are pollinating our night bloomers, our evening bloomers, like the moonflowers and brugmansia.
Right.
And things like that.
I love that.
Yeah, just give them
give
someplace,
them
a donor,
their
a
own
donor
buffet.
plant.
I
Right.
gotcha. And then the other one is our beloved stink bug or leaf-footed bug.
The leaf-footed bugs.
That one is the one that I think is a little more of a challenge to control in the
Yes.
garden. You spoke about your trap crop
Right.
with your other tomato plants.
Yes.
I know that sunflowers
They're big time trap
and
crop.
then letting your cardoon or artichoke bloom out, that
Right.
thistle flower. When we do that, they are just covered.
Yeah, they
with
really
the
like
stink
those
bugs.
complex flowers, and
Right.
I've seen them where they're literally covering the entire stem of a sunflower.
Right.
So planting a trap crop is a good strategy for that. Of course, it's not going to get them all.
Right.
And with the leaf-footed bug, you want to stay after them.
Right.
Because the more you eliminate this year, the fewer adults you have over winter that will cause you problems with next year's hatch.
Okay.
So every year, if you'll just be diligent about removal, then you'll get to that point where you don't have as many. So with them, honestly, the very best way, because they're very resistant to spray,
Right.
they take off the minute you disturb the plant. The best way to handle them is with a cordless vacuum cleaner.
I love that.
And they go into the canister, get a Ziploc bag, dump the canister in there, zip and dispose.
Right.
And then you'll decrease that and stay really persistent about it in August and September with your fall tomatoes.
Right.
So that you are preventing the overwintering adults.
So I'm going to mention one, and a lot of these things too, is it kind of a trial and error thing.
Right.
But our friend the Gunters that
Yes.
grow the heirloom tomatoes told me one time they read in an 1800s garden book.
Yes.
To go out in the garden, and of course with a gloved hand, and catch as many as you can, pinch them or cut them, fill a mason jar, maybe a third with them, fill that with water, put the lid on, set it aside for 3 or 4 days, and if you will, make a tea
Let
with
it
that
brew.
solution. Spray your plants with that, and as you know, it's smells or odors that help repel our harmful insects, that they don't like the smell of their own dead, and it does help to a degree to repel them. So
Yeah, and I think a multi-level strategy is a good idea
Right.
with the leaf-footed bug, because they are such a challenge, because they are so resistant to any kind of chemical control, whether it's organic or synthetic.
Right.
And so it's just staying after them and getting them removed
Persistence.
from the garden. Stay after it.
and that's what gardeners do. We're
we really do.
persistent.
We
Yes.
persist.
And so I noticed you put here the EM1.
Yes.
We love EM1.
EM1's wonderful. One, I use it as a soil activator when I plant the plants and get it started. It just kicks off your good biology and works with all of the good compost that's
Right.
in our soil blend. Then I also mix that into my foliar feed.
Okay.
We're beginning to know a lot about the soil food web.
Uh-huh.
But we're really just babies learning about the leaf food web, and there actually is one. And so EM1 is anti-pathogenic, meaning it can combat some of the pathogens on the leaves. So I mix a little of it into my foliar, just the directions, on the package to however much I'm mixing. And it just really helps thicken the leaf, keep that leaf biology going. It's really good disease prevention.
So it's time to go plant these tomatoes.
It is definitely time to plant tomatoes.
Okay, let's go.